sidekick?
No.
A nemesis?
A what?
A bad guy?
I'm a people person.
Have you been fighting crime long?
I don't fight crime.
What do you fight?
Wheat bones. A never-ending supply of milk.
In the 1950s, you saw ads like this all the time. Drink your milk for strong bones and a healthy body. Milk is the best food on the planet. It is a superfood. Even in the 1990s, the Got Milk slogan took the world by storm, featuring prominent celebrities with a milk mustache, which I never liked, but regardless, there were a lot of people on the milk hype train. But recently, milk has seen a huge decline in sales. In 1975, the average American drank 247 pounds of milk per year. In 2021, this number had dropped to 144 pounds per year, 42% decrease. And if you think 1975 to 2021 is too long of a time gap, from 2010 to 2020, total milk consumption in the US dropped by 20%. And at the same time, we've seen a rise in plant-based milk sales like almond milk, oat milk, and soy milk, growing over 60% between 2012 and 2022. Milk was once a superfood. Everybody consumed it, everybody liked it. Why did this public narrative and this affection for milk change?
What is happening in the dairy industry?
The demand has dropped significantly, forcing them to dump truckfuls of milk onto the ground.
Let's find out. This recent fall in milk consumption is quite staggering, considering the fact that humans have always consumed milk. While mammals have always relied on their mother's milk for early nourishment, the idea of drinking milk of other species only emerged around 10,000 years ago. This shift occurred when humans domesticated animals such as cows, sheep, and goats in regions in the Middle East, Central Asia, and North Africa. These pastoral societies discovered that milk was not just a resource for their young livestock, but could also be used as a nutritional food source for humans. Archaeological evidence suggests that milk was first consumed by early farmers in modern-day Turkey, Iran, and Pakistan. Residue analysis of ancient pottery shards dating back to 7000 BC shows traces of milk fats, indicating that humans were processing and consuming dairy products. Fast forward 1,000 years, by 6000 BC, milk drinking spread to Europe, with evidence from Neolithic sites in Britain and Central Europe showing that dairy farming had taken root. So we've begun consuming milk around 7000 BC, but we also have to analyze the evolution of lactose tolerance. In the natural state, the human body stops producing lactase, the enzyme required to digest lactose or milk sugar after infancy. This means that most early humans were lactose intolerant as adults. They were only able to consume milk because a genetic mutation emerged in certain populations, allowing people to continue producing lactase into adulthood. This mutation, known as lactase persistence, provided a survival advantage and spread rapidly in dairy farming societies. This mutation is actually not that common even today. Studies show that only about 30% of the global population is lactose tolerant today. Lactase persistence is most common in Northern Europe, where about 90% of people can digest milk. In contrast, lactose intolerance rates are much higher in East Asia at around 90%, West Africa at around 70%, and indigenous American people around 80%. Geneticists believe that the mutation allowing lactose digestion first appeared around 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, in regions where dairy farming was essential for survival. It became particularly widespread in Scandinavia, the British Isles, and central parts of Europe, where access to other food sources was limited, especially during the harsh winters that they experience. You can imagine somewhere in Northern Europe, long winters meant fewer fresh plant-based food sources. Dairy became a reliable calorie source that provided protein, fat, and even essential vitamins. Even in Mongolia, the nomadic lifestyle revolved around dairy from horses, yaks, and camels. Fermented milk products like kumis provided hydration and nutrition in arid climates. If you go south to parts of Africa, fermented dairy products like yogurt and cheese became more common than fresh milk, as fermentation reduces lactose content, making it easier to digest. So all parts of the world started to farm animals and consume milk, and not just milk but also fermented products. Even though this gene developed in humans through time, before the 19th century, milk was a local perishable product consumed mainly in rural areas. Without refrigeration or modern sanitation, raw milk was difficult to store and transport, limiting its consumption in cities. But technology advanced in the mid to late 1800s, changing this, turning milk into a mass-produced household staple. One of the most significant, and I would say the most significant breakthroughs, was pasteurization, developed by Louis Pasteur in 1864. Pasteurization involves heating milk to kill bacteria, extending its shelf life and reducing the risk of tuberculosis and other milk-borne diseases. By 1900, urban populations in Europe and North America faced face serious health risks from contaminated milk. In the US, major cities like New York and Chicago saw outbreaks of milk sickness, leading to thousands of deaths. By 1917, Chicago became the first major city to require pasteurization, and by the 1940s, pasteurized milk had become standardized across most of the United States and Europe. At the same time, capitalism saw this. Industrialized dairy farming emerged. Instead of small-scale local dairy production, large dairy operations began supplying cities with milk, facilitated by rail transport, refrigeration, and automated milking machines. This mass production transformed milk from a regional product to a global commodity. And of course, where there's money and commerce, the government has to have a say as well. Governments played a major role in turning milk into a dietary staple, particularly in the United States. Throughout the 20th century, milk was heavily subsidized and promoted as an essential source of nutrition. Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933 introduced price supports for dairy farmers, ensuring steady production and supply. During World War II, the US government encouraged milk consumption to support soldiers and civilians, promoting it as a food of national importance. In 1946, the National School Lunch Act mandated that milk be included in school meals, further solidifying its place in the American diet. These rules and regulations were solidified in the 1960s and 70s. Milk was deeply embedded in the government nutritional guidelines. The USDA's food pyramid, introduced in 1992, recommended 2 to 3 servings of dairy per day, reinforcing the idea that milk was essential for health. Couple this with the fact that milk was cheap and accessible, it had an economic advantage over plant-based alternatives which lack similar support. Drinking milk 3 times a day is now almost unheard of. The dairy industry aggressively lobbied and latched onto these government programs. Through aggressive advertising and strategic partnerships, dairy organizations convinced generations that milk was indispensable for health.
Bye, Mommy.
This included a lot of marketing gimmicks. Got Milk is the most famous one that ran from 1993 to 2014, becoming one of the most recognizable advertising campaigns of all time. Celebrities, athletes, milk mustaches, you know the drill, reinforcing milk as a symbol of strength and health. Even in the 1980s, Milk, It Does a Body Good was an extremely popular campaign, emphasizing milk's role in bone health, particularly for children and teenagers. The dairy industry also sponsored a bunch of scientific research focused around milk, strong bones, muscle growth, and weight loss, though many of these claims were later questioned. By the late 20th century, milk was no longer just a drink, it was a health brand, essential for growth development and particularly athletic performance. To tell you the scale of this effort, let's look at the Got Milk campaign, started in 1993 by the California Milk Processor Board, or CMPB. This campaign ran from 1993 to 2014 and had over 70 television commercials and hundreds of print ads. The psychology of the campaign was simple but effective. FOMO, the fear of missing out. Instead of just listing milk's health benefits, it focused on situations where people regretted not having milk. This campaign alone increased milk sales in California by 7% within its first year and remained a dominant slogan for over 2 decades. And in part, this was only possible by massive lobbying. The National Dairy Council, or NDC, spent millions lobbying the USDA to ensure dairy products were prioritized in official guidelines. The Dairy Management Inc., a government-funded marketing agency, was created in 1995 specifically to promote dairy products and boost sales. By 2015, the US government was spending over $200 million annually to promote dairy consumption, despite increasing concerns over lactose intolerance and alternative food options. So you have the government heavily promoting the dairy industry, and then you have the dairy industry lobbying the government to make a perfect situation where milk was known as a superfood. But this is where the science versus marketing debate comes in. Does milk really build strong bones? We really haven't answered that question. Not just strong bones, does it have any nutritional benefits? Well, the pro-milk argument claims that milk is high in calcium, a key mineral for bone density. The USDA and National Dairy Council have emphasized that regular dairy consumption reduces the risk of osteoporosis. Some studies, such as those published by the National Osteoporosis Foundation, suggest that milk intake is associated with higher bone mineral density, or BMD, in children and teenagers. Now let's analyze the counter-argument. A 2014 Harvard study followed 96,000 people over 22 years and found that high milk consumption did not lower the risk of fractures. A 2015 meta-analysis in the British Medical Journal reviewed multiple studies and found little correlation between milk intake and fracture prevention in adults. Some researchers argue that countries with the highest dairy consumption, for example the United States and Sweden, also have some of the highest osteoporosis rates, suggesting that other factors such as vitamin D intake, lifestyle, and overall diet play a larger role in building strong stronger bones. Studies like this and others are a primary reason for the fall of dairy. In the 1970s, the average American drank about 247 pounds of milk per year. By 2020, this had fallen to 141 pounds. Milk sales have declined 42% since 1975. This decline in sales is not just science-based, it is also human body-based. Lactose intolerance awareness has risen in the past few decades. Roughly 65% of the world's population has some degree of lactose intolerance, meaning when you consume milk, you feel funny in your stomach. It causes bloating, stomach pain, and in some cases, massive diarrhea. Sorry, I just had to say that. East Asian populations in particular are lactose intolerant much more on average. Around 80% of the African population is also lactose intolerant. For much of the 20th century, lactose intolerance was rarely discussed because of massive lobbying. Those who suffer from digestive discomfort after drinking milk were often unaware of the cause, but people still wanted to consume milk, and this is where the alternatives come in. Before we dig deeper into why the alternative milk industry might finish the dairy industry once and for all, do not forget to subscribe and smash the like button. We study food on this channel and how food intertwines with business, society, and culture throughout history. Food is essential for us, and it's important for us to understand it better. Lactose-free milk, or alternative milk. As dairy consumption declined, the plant-based milk industry exploded. Consumers were drawn to these alternatives for a variety of reasons, particularly digestive comfort, environmental concerns, and ethical considerations as well. To give you an idea, in 2012, plant-based milks made up just 5% of the milk market. By 2023, they accounted for over 15%, with continued growth expected. Almond milk is the most popular, accounting for 59% of plant-based milk sales in the US. Oat milk has seen the fastest growth though, with sales increasing 300% between 2019 and 2021. Soy milk was once a strong alternative but has declined, although still remains a strong contender. These alternatives are more digestible, easier on the stomach. They also might be healthier, depending on the sugar content and processing methods. But one of the most underrated factors why people consume alternatives is the sustainability part. Dairy farming has a significant footprint, requiring large amounts of land, water, and feed. Producing 1 gallon of cow's milk requires 1,000 gallons of water, while almond milk requires about 384 gallons and oat milk just 48 gallons. You can see the massive difference here. The methane emissions from dairy cows also contribute significantly to climate change, leading many consumers to opt for plant-based alternatives. You also have the rise of veganism and vegetarian diets where people avoid milk and animal products altogether. And this is not just a fad. Rates of veganism and vegetarianism have gone up throughout the world. This is a fundamental change in consumer preference, and people are starting to view milk as optional and not an essential part of their diet. This is good news for alternative dairy farmers, but bad news for the dairy industry. Farm bankruptcies have surged, particularly in states like Wisconsin, which lost over 2,500 dairy farms between 2017 and 2021. This also means that smaller family-owned dairy farms are more likely to shut down, while large corporate dairy operations dominate the market since they're able to absorb that hit in falling demand. Mega dairies with thousands of cows can produce milk at lower costs, but at the expense of animal welfare and environmental sustainability. The government is stepping in and subsidizing dairy farming, keeping milk artificially cheap because it's still a huge part of the Western diet. Programs like the Federal Milk Marketing Orders and dairy margin coverage provide price support to struggling farmers. The dairy industry is not going away overnight, but it faces major challenges, particularly small family-owned dairy farms, which arguably are better for the consumer. Milk has had a very interesting history. It was very popular before, it still is popular now, but is losing its grip when it comes to consumer preference. The future of milk could be very different from what we see today, with some people looking forward to the rise of lab-grown dairy. Precision fermentation could allow companies to create real dairy proteins without cows, offering an ethical and sustainable alternative. Startups like Perfect Day are already producing cow-free milk proteins, which could revolutionize the industry. Alternative milk is also not going anywhere. It's projected to reach $47 billion by 2030, driven by health-conscious consumers and environmental concerns. Big Dairy is also pivoting. Brands like Danone, which owns Silk, and Nestle are investing heavily in plant-based alternatives. The writing could be on the wall. Milk has some benefits, but if someone could get those benefits without enduring that stomach pain because of lactose intolerance, why would they choose traditional milk over the several alternatives, given that in the future, the taste can also be replicated? That is a question the dairy industry is taking seriously, and the question that will determine the future of milk. If you enjoyed this video, do not forget to subscribe and smash the like button. We do this every single week on this channel. We explore how food intertwines with history, culture, and business. Food is essential for us, and it's important for us to understand it better. I'll see you next week.